So, phonologically cued lexical anticipation in bilingual listeners and the role of vocabulary knowledge. So, the consistent phonology of the indefinite articles a and an in the English language give rise to a potentially representative study of active word prediction. For example, in the display shown, if I were to say, the woman reached for a compass, you would know that the following noun would begin with a consonant due to the consistent role of nouns beginning with consonants are preceded by a, and nouns beginning with vowels are preceded by an. Now, if each of the singular pictures in the display started with either a consonant or a vowel, you would be unable to predict the subsequent noun based solely on the article a or an. With this, we can see the impact of the preceding article on the anticipatory effect of the following noun. So, a study conducted in 2005 by Catherine DeLong and her colleagues used ERP brainwaves of monolingual English speakers to measure the efficiency of prediction of the upcoming noun based on the phonology of the preceding article. Her results suggested that active prediction is not restricted to vocabulary size, but rather speakers rely on the form of the preceding articles to predict the following noun. In 2012, a study conducted by Borowski and colleagues examined that there is more than just vocabulary level and age associated with the anticipatory abilities in children and adults, but this study used verbal cues. So while the previously mentioned studies used monolingual speakers, this study looked at bilinguals with the objective of this project being to explore the question of correlation between second language learners of English and the use of the phonological form of an article relative to the vocabulary level to anticipate an upcoming noun using a remote word eye tracking study. We recruited Spanish-English bilingual adults from the University of Puerto Rico, and a language history questionnaire was used to evaluate their qualification status. Participants were also monetarily compensated for both the survey and the study completion, and a vocabulary test was administered during the experimental session to measure the participants' vocabulary size and examine if there is a correlation with their level of active prediction. Originally, the study was to be conducted via the iLink 1000, but the actual study was conducted remotely via the use of Zoom, Google Sites, and YouTube videos. Each experimental session was recorded and later processed for analysis via Pratt, ELAN, and VLC. For the materials, for each display, the participant would hear a sentence containing the target word preceded by either a or an, depending on the first letter of the following noun. The target picture is a singular picture mentioned in the sentence. The competitor is a singular picture not mentioned in the sentence, and the two plural pictures shown in both figures are the distractors. Figure 1 shows a match display in which both the target and the competitor begin with a consonant. In the case of figure 1, the target word in the sentence would be preceded by the indefinite article a due to the consistency of this phonological role in English. For example, the woman reached for a compass. Here, this could have also been the competitor, tomato. In figure 2, we see a mismatch display in which the target word begins with a consonant and the competitor begins with a vowel. Here, the indefinite article of the sentence would be a, different from if the target were the competitor, which would be preceded by an. So if you heard the same sentence, the woman reached for a compass, before hearing compass, you already would anticipate it to be that picture based on the article. So based on our hypothesis of the anticipatory effect, this should prompt the participants to glance at the target picture after hearing the article and before hearing the target noun. So to run the study remotely, the participants were sent a link to a Google site that walked them step by step through various YouTube videos that were embedded within each page. Here we have a video to show an example of how a participant would access the Zoom call and begin the experiment. The participant would see the consent form and they would have the option to download it. And then from here, they would be presented with directions to ensure a webcam setup that would allow us to code the recorded Zoom call. Following this, they would connect with the experimenter through Zoom. And they would then click through to the experimental session, and here they would be instructed to verbally locate the target picture mentioned in the sentence. And with every video, the session was preceded by directions to just refresh their memory, even though I, as the experimenter, would give them instructions also.
The boy was near an alien.
The participant would say bottom.
The woman pointed to an I.
And they would say left. And that was just a little video to show you what we did. And obviously the video played more quickly than the actual experiment just for the presentation. So for expectations, in previous studies, A has been noted as a non-informative article, while an has been shown to be an informative article. The non-informative title of A comes from previous studies indicating that there is no difference in rate of prediction of the following noun when presented with a display in which the target picture is preceded by the article A, whether it is a match or a mismatch display. But "and" is considered an informative article because it has been shown in previous studies that when participants hear "and" before the target in the case of a mismatch display, they are more likely to glance at the target picture prior to hearing it in the sentence than in a match display. So as an example of the results of the expectations of the informative versus non-informative articles, here the x-axis shows the fixation objects from the display, the y-axis is the proportion of fixations to each object, the orange bars represent the match display, the blue bars represent the mismatch display, the left panel shows the data for article A, and the right panel shows the data for article "and." If the bilingual adults do demonstrate that preceding articles impact the anticipatory effect, we expected the glances during each display to be significantly different. In a match display, the participants should glance at both the target and competitor pictures equally. In a mismatch display, we should see the participants glancing more often at the target picture. The figure on the left shows the A situation, in which we would expect no difference in the anticipatory effect between the match and mismatch displays, as shown with the tallest bars denoting the target object being of equal height. In the figure on the right, we expected to see a difference in fixation proportions to the target in the case of the "and" article between the match and mismatch displays. As I previously mentioned, it has been regarded as an informative article. So this figure displayed shows the data collected from all of our participants, and the axes, legend, and panels align with the expected results figure. As the bars in the left panel for the A article, participants showed no difference in the proportion fixation to the target picture for either the match or mismatch display. If we looked at the right panel, in the case of the article "and," we do see a difference in fixations to the target noun between the match and mismatch displays. This indicates that participants showed "and" as being an informative article, as it was more indicative of the subsequent noun in both types of displays. So this figure shows the data divided into participants of high and low vocabulary knowledge. Again, the axes, legend, and panels align with the previous figures, but here the top panel is representative of high-level vocabulary participants, and the bottom is low-level vocabulary participants. This division was done via a median split of the scores from the vocabulary assessment. So in the case of high vocabulary participants, in the top left panel, we see the proportion of fixations to the target when hearing the article A in the case of the match and mismatch displays are nearly equal. While in the case of "and" in the top right panel, we see the proportion of fixations to the target increased in the mismatch situation. For lower vocabulary participants, in the bottom left panel, the article A showed basically equivalent glances to the target picture in both displays. Interestingly, we see the same effect in the bottom right panel, which is representative of the data for article "and." This indicates that lower vocabulary participants did not show the awareness of the difference between A and "and." So, as we saw in the data of all participants, the article A had no impact on the anticipatory effect in the match or mismatch display, but the proportion of fixations to the target in the case of "and" showed that this article had a greater impact on the anticipatory effect. This data indicates that A could be perceived as more of a default article that does not elicit significance to the subsequent noun like "and" does. This follows the concept of informative and non-informative articles, as the participant did not need to wait to identify the target after hearing "and," but did when hearing A. So when the data was divided between high and low vocabulary skill participants, it was shown that the anticipatory effect did not differ in low vocabulary participants between the displays with either A or "and." This indicates that participants with a higher level of vocabulary knowledge are more aware of the significance of the form of the preceding article. With this, we can see the vocabulary knowledge does impact the extent of the anticipatory effect in Spanish-English bilingual adults. So we have learned that these results suggest that when teaching a language to second language learners, teaching vocabulary has an effect on speed and efficiency by which they process spoken language. So from my PIRE experience, just like everybody else, unfortunately, we were unable to travel. I was supposed to go to the University of Puerto Rico, but we could not because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Thankfully, though, with the workings of Dr. Katrina Cano and Dr. Julie Ducius, we were able to completely convert our PIRE projects to remote format. Through this experience, I learned so much about not only various aspects of research, but also the essentiality of adaptability for my future endeavors. Along with learning all of this, I also had the opportunity to meet new people, talk to people from Puerto Rico, even though it was through Zoom, and form new relationships with the other PIRE fellows and all of the people in the lab. I am extremely thankful that we were able to continue with PIRE despite this pandemic. So I would like to thank Dr. Julie Ducius and Dr. Katrina Cano from Penn State for being so patient with us as we work through our projects. I also would like to thank Miriam Senawa and Heather Mann for facilitating all of the fine details with PIRE, and our PIRE partner, Dr. Rosa Guzardo at the University of Puerto Rico. And lastly, the National Science Foundation with the Partners for International Research Education for giving me this amazing opportunity. And does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Olivia. Very, very nice. Very good, very wonderful work. Any questions?
I have a question. Olivia, so can you talk a little bit? So you in kind of the last slide there, you were saying that the higher vocabulary is associated with this awareness or ability to anticipate based on the definite article, but do you have any hypotheses about why that is, or is it specific to vocabulary, or is it just that vocabulary is kind of a stand-in for proficiency in general, or maybe exposure to the language? So what do you think is the role of vocabulary there? Is it specific to vocabulary or not?
I think so. We assessed it, obviously, like I said, with we did the just strictly vocabulary size assessment, but we also did category fluency and verbal fluency, but we haven't been able to analyze that section of the data yet. But I think that it could be a combination of both just strictly vocabulary knowledge, but also the exposure to the language, because they've heard the articles more often than somebody with a lower level of vocabulary.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Olivia.
Thank you.